Hello everyone, this is my oral presentation for engaging in the humanities, distorted by the media. Before I begin, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land, and as a student of Curtin University, I acknowledge the Aboriginal people in their strength, resilience and capacity. My argument is based on Chris Mooney's article titled Blinded by Science, How Balanced Coverage Lets the Scientific Fringe Hijack Reality. Using some examples of his as well as one of my own, I will argue that poor journalism and misrepresentation published in the scientific field leads to people's knowledge being distorted by the media, ultimately affecting their actions. Mooney's article talks about the challenges that journalists face which prevent them from producing accurate information on scientific claims. First of all, let us establish that scientific theories and interpretations survive or perish depending upon these things. Whether they're published in highly competitive journals that practice strict quality control, whether the results upon which they're based can be replicated by other scientists, and ultimately whether they win over scientific peers. When consensus builds, it is based on repeated testing and retesting of an idea. According to Mooney, journalists face many challenges, such as political reporting, pedantic editors who want things their way, how much weight to give each side of an argument, lack of expertise, and the Bush administration. Bush administration statements and actions have often given privileged status to a fringe scientific view over a well-documented and strong mainstream conclusion. Journalists have thus had to decide whether to report on a he-said-she-said battle between scientists and the White House, or get to the bottom of each alleged distortion and report on who's actually right. The biggest topic on which scientists most strongly denounce both the media and the Bush administration is global warming. While some scientific uncertainty remains in the climate field, the most rigorous peer-reviewed assessments have cemented a consensus view that human greenhouse gas emissions are fueling the greenhouse effect. Yet the Bush administration has consistently sought to undermine this position. The importance of the climate change issue to the scientific critique of the press does not arise by accident. Climate change has massive ramifications not only for the future of our carbon-based economy, but also for the planet itself. Energy interests wishing to strip off action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions have a documented history of supporting the small group of scientists who question the human role in causing climate change, as well as consciously strategizing about how to sow confusion on the issue and to sway the journalists, which, as mentioned before, don't know any better. The Stanford climatologist Stephen Snyder echoes this concern. As a scientist whose interactions with the media on the subject of climate change spans decades, Snyder has reflected at length on the subject and states that there are rarely just two polar opposite sides, but rather a spectrum of potential outcomes, often accompanied by a considerable history of scientific assessment of the relative credibility of these many possibilities. A mainstream, well-established consensus may be balanced against the opposing views of a few extremists, and to the uniformed, each position seems equally credible. I will now present two cases of articles associated with global warming where information was inaccurately presented. Case 1. The Washington Post published a controversial piece on climate science by James Schlesinger on July 7th of 2003. Schlesinger presented a clear implication that scientists don't know enough about the causes of climate change to justify strong pollution controls. However, that is not how most climatologists feel, and Schlesinger is not a climatologist. He is an economist. His Washington Post also failed to note that he sits on the board of directors of Peabody Energy, the largest coal company in the world, which has also resisted the push for mandatory controls on greenhouse gas emissions, such as those required by the Kyoto Protocol. Case 2. Gugliotta. Guy Gugliotta published an article in the Washington Post 6 months after Schlesinger. The article reported on a study finding that global warming could drive 15 to 37% of living species toward extinction by mid-century. While Gugliotta did not make the mistake of writing a balanced article, he did include a skeptic perspective, but failed to mention that the skeptic receives substantial support from a leading funder of the oil industry, which questioned the scientific consensus of climate change. The skeptic, named William O'Keefe, has also chaired the Anti-Kyoto Protocol Global Climate Change Coalition. This brings me to my example of swine flu. The swine flu influenza was vastly broadcasted in 2009. Because of this, many precautions and guidelines were put into place and actively enforced worldwide. While the officials acted accordingly, society was misinformed of how serious the swine flu was. To support this, I will bring some research to your attention that compared the swine flu to seasonal flu. It only took 3 months for the World Health Organization to declare phase 6 of the pandemic alert, so clearly the swine flu spread incredibly quick. Combinations of media coverage, World Health Organization announcements, and subsequent reactions of government bodies determined how Australia then responded, such as confirmed cases into quarantine, recommended protective equipment, closing down schools, donating money to research, increasing the shelf life of drugs, and providing antiviral medications to high-risk patients. As I stated earlier, poor journalism and misrepresentation published in the scientific field leads to people's knowledge being distorted by the media, ultimately affecting their actions. In a report published by Christine Stomes, she comments on results found by Dr. Edward Bologna, a lead researcher from the Mansfield Clinic Research Foundation. In his study, results showed that in children with swine flu, 1.5% were hospitalized, as compared to 3.7%, which had seasonal flu. In adults, 4% of those with swine flu were hospitalized, as were 2.3% with seasonal flu. Additionally, a case study earlier this year compared the mortality rates of the seasonal flu from 2003 to 2009 to the mortality rate of the swine flu. Results showed that for patients under 65 years of age, the mortality rate caused by swine flu was similar to that of the years with the highest seasonal flu mortality rate, being the years 2003 and 2007. For patients 65 or older, the highest seasonal flu mortality rate was 5 times higher than the mortality rate for swine flu. So, which one do you believe is more severe? Thanks for listening.